Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere most people wouldn't dare to remember. Back to 1856, deep in the sweating heart of Mississippi. The kind of place where the air hums like something alive, and every whisper carries a secret no one's supposed to tell. You probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Ballantine plantation looked dead long before it actually died. The paint on the columns had peeled into pale curls, the roof sagged where rainwater pooled, and the magnolias that once perfumed the entrance now leaned like mourners. The soil had grown tired, too, coughing up dry weeds instead of cotton. But still, Charles Ballantine walked the veranda each morning with a cane and a glass of brandy, pretending the world hadn't noticed. Inside the house, the air was heavy, not just from the summer heat, but from the soundless strain of something waiting to happen. The servants moved slower now. They avoided the upstairs hallway, especially the door to Clara's room. She was 30, unmarried, and known in town only by the pale shape of her parasol. When she did appear in daylight, she seemed carved out of absence. Skin too white for the sun, hair pulled too tight to move in the breeze. Her eyes always looked a little lost, as if searching for something that had never been real. Her father blamed her for many things. For her mother's early death, for the gossip that bled through town, for the endless debt that kept the plantation half mortgaged. But mostly, he blamed her for not being the son he wanted. The night the arrangement began, thunder pressed against the horizon like a warning. Charles had been drinking again, his boots echoing through the hall as he barked orders no one wanted to hear. Samuel was summoned from the fields, tall, quiet, with the kind of strength that made people look twice before speaking. He was led to the study, where the master waited behind a desk littered with half-empty glasses and unpaid bills. "Close the door," Ballantine said. Samuel did. The conversation that followed was low, slurred, and cruel. By the time the door reopened, Samuel's face was hollow, his eyes darker than before. He didn't look at anyone as he passed. From that night on, the plantation felt wrong in ways no one could name. The crickets stopped near the big house. The dogs refused to sleep on the porch. And Clara's light, once faintly visible through her curtains at night, began to burn longer, flickering past midnight like a candle that didn't want to go out. Rumors began before the first week ended. The housemaids whispered that Clara was heard sobbing in the middle of the night, her father's footsteps pacing in the hall, outside her room. Others said Samuel was seen leaving through the side door before dawn, his shirt torn, his hands trembling. No one dared speak of it where Ballantine could hear. Then came the Sunday supper. The family table sat nearly empty, only Charles and his daughter. The candlelight trembled over their faces. He carved the meat without looking at her, his lips pressed thin. "You've brought shame to this house," he muttered. Clara didn't answer. She set down her fork and stared at the glass of water before her. "You made the shame, father," she said quietly. He looked up then, a sharp, violent glance. That night, the servants heard the sound of breaking glass, then silence. The next morning, the field stood untouched, though Samuel never appeared for roll call. His name was called 3 times. No answer. Charles Ballantine told everyone the man had run off, but the overseer noticed that his cabin door was still latched from the inside, the bed neatly made. Only one thing was missing, the silver locket Clara used to wear. Days turned to weeks. Clara was seen less often, pale as chalk, sometimes wandering near the edge of the swamp. She carried her parasol even when there was no sun, her steps slow, her head bowed. When she passed the field hands, they lowered their eyes. One of them, an older woman named Dinah, swore she saw something clinging to Clara's sleeve, a dark handprint that disappeared when she blinked. At night, the big house creaked. Doors shifted. The air smelled faintly of rot and candle smoke. Some said the master had taken to drinking in the study till dawn, muttering to himself, arguing with voices no one else could hear. Others claimed they saw him walking toward the swamp, a lantern swinging in his hand, calling his daughter's name, though she was already asleep upstairs. But she wasn't asleep. In the still hours before morning, Clara sat before her mirror, tracing the line of her throat with trembling fingers. The glass caught her reflection twice, one in the mirror, one faintly behind it, like something waiting its turn. The house breathed with her. Her father's footsteps echoed down the hall. The sound stopped outside her door. A pause, then the slow turn of a doorknob, and silence. She whispered, "I know what you did." The words seemed to float, heavier than air. Somewhere beyond the walls, thunder rolled again, closer this time, as if the earth itself had heard her. That was the night the house went still. The servants awoke to silence, so thick it seemed to press against their ears. No footsteps, no voices, just the steady hum of rain against the windows. When the cook knocked on Clara's door, no one answered. By midday, the door was still locked. Ballantine ordered it broken open. What they found inside would stain the memory of that house forever. The sheets were soaked dark, the floor sticky beneath their boots. The smell, iron and earth, and something faintly sweet, filled the air. But there was no body. Only the faint outline of two figures pressed into the mattress. One heavier, one slight, and muddy footprints leading from the bed to the open window, disappearing into the storm. Charles Ballantine didn't speak for 3 days after that. When he finally did, his voice was different. Hollow, dry, as if something had taken root in his throat. He forbade anyone to speak her name again. The workers obeyed, but they still whispered when the nights were long. They said her voice could be heard near the swamp, calling softly through the reeds. Sometimes, they saw a flicker of white among the cypress, like a woman's dress or fog pretending to be one. And when the moon rose high, the sound of her father's boots echoed faintly across the veranda. Pacing, always pacing, as though searching for the end of something he'd never find. If you've stayed this long, you're braver than most. The nights after Clara's disappearance grew longer. The moon seemed to hang lower over the fields, swollen and yellow, as though it too was watching. By day, Charles Ballantine still wore his coat and cane, still barked at the servants to keep the grounds proper. But his voice had changed, quieter, almost thoughtful, like a man talking to himself in another room. At dinner, he would set 2 plates instead of 1. He'd pour water into the second glass and stare at it until the candle burned down to nothing. When the maids cleared the table, they swore the rim of that glass still shimmered, as if something invisible had touched it. Clara's room stayed locked, though he'd ordered it cleaned. No one wanted that job. It was Dinah, the oldest of the housemaids, who finally dared to enter. She went in with a Bible in one hand and a rag in the other, whispering a prayer as she crossed the threshold. By the time she came back down, her hands were shaking. "There's a smell up there," she said, her voice thin. "Like the river in August, and her mirror's still fogged, sir. Like someone just breathed on it." Ballantine dismissed her, but his own face went pale. That night, the study door stayed closed until morning. The servants heard muffled voices. 2 of them, though only one man sat inside. No one saw him sleep anymore. Samuel's name still wasn't spoken, but his absence carried weight. The overseer kept his cabin shut, Yet every dawn, his tools appeared rearranged. His boots, once lined neatly by the door, were found by the creek one morning, full of water, as though someone had walked straight into the river and left them behind. Rumors grew heavier than the air. Some said Clara had run off with him. Others whispered she had drowned herself. But the field hands, the ones who listened to the night, said something else entirely. They said she'd come back wrong. A week after the storm, a boy named Elias saw her. He'd gone to fetch kindling near the swamp before dawn, when the mist still clung to the trees. He swore he saw a white shape standing knee deep in the reeds. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, but then it moved, slow, deliberate, and the fog around it seemed to breathe. He ran back to the quarters, half screaming, half praying. By the time the overseer came to check, there was nothing there but water rippling outward, as if someone had just stepped away. When Ballantine heard the story, he struck the boy for lying. But later that evening, the master was seen walking the same path, lantern in hand. He stayed by the swamp for an hour, calling her name, soft at first, then louder, until his voice cracked and disappeared into the trees. When he returned, his trousers were soaked to the knees. He said nothing. That night, the rain returned. It came in hard sheets, battering the windows like fists. Inside, the air turned cold enough for breath to show. In her locked room, the mirror fogged again. The sheets, washed and replaced, were found damp by morning. The servants began sleeping in pairs, afraid of being alone after dark. Down in the quarters, they told stories to fill the silence. Some swore they heard humming from the big house. A woman's voice, soft and broken, the kind that made your bones ache. Others said they saw Samuel's shadow by the old oak, where he used to sharpen tools. No one went near the swamp anymore. The frogs had gone quiet. Even the mosquitoes seemed to avoid it, as if the air there had turned poisonous. Ballantine started writing letters, long, rambling pages that no one ever saw. He sealed them in envelopes with no names, burned them, and kept the ashes in a jar on his desk. Sometimes he spoke to that jar. The overseer quit without a word. He packed his bag, left his wages on the table, and rode north. 2 nights later, his horse was found wandering near the gate. The saddle was empty, the reins dragging in the dirt. No one ever found him. By the middle of July, the plantation was half abandoned. The fields had gone brown, the air heavy with mildew and rot. A pair of workers tried to leave, a man and his wife. But before they reached the river road, a storm rolled in so suddenly they had to take shelter under the mill shed. Lightning struck the old tree beside it. The sound tore the sky in half. When morning came, the man's wife was found staring blankly into the ashes of what used to be the shed, whispering. She walked through the fire. No one asked who she meant. Ballantine's descent was quieter. He stopped shaving. He stopped wearing shoes indoors. He'd stand at the parlor window for hours, staring at the fields that no longer grew. Sometimes he'd speak, to someone no one else could see. "You think I wanted this?" he'd say. "You think I chose any of it?" Then he'd laugh, just once, and the sound would die somewhere in the rafters. One evening, Dina caught him standing at the mirror in the foyer, whispering Clara's name over and over until his voice failed. When she stepped closer, she saw that the mirror was fogged from the inside. Not the glass, but something behind it. And for just a heartbeat, she swore there were 2 faces looking back. By late summer, the nights had grown thick as tar. The smell of the swamp reached the veranda now. Not the usual wet earth scent, but something older, heavier, almost sweet. The workers began leaving in secret, one by one. Before the last of them went, Dinah stopped at the door. "That girl ain't gone, sir," she said. "She's waitin' on you to see what you did." Ballantine didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the window, on the faint reflection of the fields outside, and the single pale figure standing at their edge. That night, lightning flashed again. The glass shattered. He went out into the storm barefoot, carrying nothing but a lantern. From the upstairs hallway, the faint sound of a door creaking open followed him, though no one had touched it in months. The storm swallowed his voice, but those who stayed behind heard him calling through the rain. One word, over and over. Clara. When morning came, the house stood quiet. The front door was open. The lantern lay extinguished on the steps, and from the swamp, faint and rhythmic, came the sound of something breathing. Slow, heavy, patient. If you've stayed this long, would you have gone out into that storm? By the time August crept in, the Ballantine estate felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The air stood still, thick with the scent of mildew, wax, and something faintly metallic, the smell that lingers after blood dries on wood. The cicadas had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to avoid the house. In the quarters, the remaining workers spoke little during the day. They moved quickly, kept their heads down, and left their candles burning through the night. No one wanted to walk the grounds alone anymore, not after what they'd begun hearing. It started as faint tapping, like fingernails against glass, from the direction of the main house. Then came the crying, soft, muffled, the sound of someone stifling their sobs. "Miss Clara?" someone whispered. "She's still up there." But Clara's door was nailed shut now. Charles Ballantine had done it himself after finding it open one morning. He'd used 4 nails, each one driven in while his hands trembled. Afterward, he told Dinah the wood had moved under the hammer, as though something on the other side was pushing back. Rumor spread that Clara had been seen again, first near the swamp, then by the orchard fence, then in the moonlit corridor upstairs. The first to claim it was a young field hand named Jacob, who returned to the quarters shaking, his shirt wet with sweat, though the night had cooled. "She was standing there," he said, voice cracking, just inside the hall. Her face was wrong, too pale, like chalk rubbed on bone, and her eyes, they wasn't looking at me, they was looking through. Dinah slapped him quiet, told him not to speak her name, but everyone heard. The next night, half the quarters refused to sleep indoors. Ballantine himself changed too. He started keeping the curtains drawn tight. He forbade lamps after sunset, claiming the light brought her closer. He'd sit in the parlor with only the glow of the hearth, muttering lines from scripture, and then laughing softly when the words came out wrong. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow," he'd whisper, and then trail off, chuckling under his breath. The laughter never sounded human for long. Then came the incident at the well. 2 of the kitchen hands went to draw water before dawn. As they lowered the bucket, they heard something strike the wood below. Not a stone, not a splash, but a sound like knuckles rapping gently from beneath the surface. They froze. The bucket rope went taut, pulled downward as though something had caught hold. One of the men, too afraid to look, let go and ran. The other stayed long enough to see the water churn, then still. When Ballantine was told, he dismissed it. "Water settles," he said. But later that night, he went to the well himself. The servants watched from the window as he stood there for nearly an hour, peering into the dark, unmoving circle. When he returned, his face was grey. He washed his hands twice before speaking to anyone. "She's not in the swamp," he said quietly. "She's beneath us." No one asked what he meant. That same evening, the parlor clock stopped at 3:07. Every other clock on the property followed within the hour. By midnight, the house had gone completely silent. Dinah, unable to sleep, began her nightly prayer, but as she whispered, a faint sound drifted through the floorboards. A woman's voice, humming. The tune was simple, childish, like something sung to calm a frightened child. It came from beneath the parlor. She pressed her ear to the floor. The voice grew clearer, closer. Between the melody, she thought she heard words. A phrase repeated again and again, too soft to make out. When she stood, her candle flickered and went out. She didn't finish the prayer that night. By the following morning, the fog had rolled in from the swamp, clinging low and white across the fields. It didn't lift with the sun. The entire plantation seemed caught inside it, trapped in a grey breath that refused to move. From somewhere deep within the mist came the echo of footsteps, not one set, but two, walking in perfect unison. Those who heard it said it sounded almost rehearsed, like a dance. Later that day, Ballantine called for every remaining worker to gather at the steps. His voice carried the weight of command, but his eyes were hollow, his posture bent. He held his cane loosely, tapping it once against the porch rail. "No one leaves this land," he said. "Not until she's found." His words landed like a curse. The workers exchanged glances, but said nothing. They all knew no one had seen Samuel's grave in weeks. The wooden cross had sunk halfway into the soil, swallowed slowly by the wet ground. At night, fireflies gathered there, more than anywhere else on the property, flickering like eyes. Dinah tried one last time to speak sense to him. She found him sitting in Clara's room. The nails pulled from the door, the window open to the fog. "Mr. Ballantine," she said softly. "Whatever's out there, it ain't her no more." He didn't look at her. "You're wrong," he whispered. "She's trying to come home." When Dinah left, she crossed herself 3 times before stepping into the hall. The scent of the swamp followed her down the stairs. That night, thunder began without rain. The sky pulsed white above the cypress, and the fields glowed faintly, as if the lightning had seeped into the earth. And then, from somewhere near the well, came a sound. Slow, dragging, like wet feet moving across gravel. The dogs barked once, then fell silent. Dinah lit a candle and pressed herself to the window. Through the fog, she saw a shape moving toward the house. It was small, hunched, wrapped in something pale. The closer it came, the more it looked like a woman. Barefoot, her gown clinging wet against her legs. Dinah covered her mouth, whispering, "Lord help us." The shape stopped at the bottom step, its head tilted slightly upward, as though listening. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the front door creaked open, by itself. The figure stepped inside. By dawn, the house was still. The fog had lifted. When Dinah entered the parlor, she found Ballantine's cane on the floor. The jar of ashes spilled open beside it. The faint outline of wet footprints led to the grand staircase, and halfway up, they simply stopped. The only sound left was the ticking of the clock. The same clock that had stopped the night before. "If you're still here, you heard the humming too, didn't you?" The morning after the footprints vanished up the stairs, the Ballantine house looked untouched. But it wasn't. The stillness had changed. It wasn't the quiet of peace anymore. It was the kind that feels like something's waiting to breathe. Charles Ballantine didn't come down for breakfast. The servants waited, listening for his steps on the landing. None came. By noon, Dinah climbed the stairs herself, holding a candle despite the daylight. The air upstairs felt heavier, humid, metallic, and faintly sweet, like lilies left too long in water. She reached the master's door and knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder this time. The wood felt warm under her knuckles. When she finally turned the handle, the door gave without sound. Ballantine sat at his desk, his back to her, hands resting flat on the ledger. His shirt was damp with sweat. The ink on the pages had run, long, black smudges like veins. "Sir." He didn't move. She took a step closer, her candlelight trembling. That was when she saw it on the wall beside him. A pattern, faint but deliberate, drawn in what looked like mud or something darker. Two shapes intertwined, looping and curling together like the outline of bodies in an embrace. She whispered his name again. He turned slowly, as if waking from deep sleep. His eyes were bloodshot, his mouth dry. "She's not angry," he murmured. "She's only cold." Then he smiled, thin and slow. By afternoon, he'd ordered the men to dig. "Behind the well," he said. "You'll find where the ground sinks." They obeyed, though none wanted to. The soil was soft, still wet from rain. The deeper they dug, the worse the smell became. Not decay, not quite, but something that made their stomachs twist. At 3 feet deep, one man's shovel struck wood. A box, rough, splintered, hand-built. Ballantine dropped to his knees beside it and tore at the earth with his bare hands. When the lid gave, the men stepped back. Inside lay Samuel's body, or what was left of it. His face had gone slack with rot, but something about it looked peaceful. One hand rested over his chest, clutching a silver locket. Ballantine's breath caught. He reached for it. The locket opened on its own. Inside was a miniature portrait, Clara's face, painted years ago. Her eyes, once gentle, now seemed to follow him. The men ran before sunset. Only Dinah stayed, praying quietly by the door as Ballantine sat in the dirt, whispering to the corpse. "You see?" he said softly. "She kept you close." That night the rain began again. It came hard and sudden, beating the house until the shutters screamed. Dinah lit every candle she could find. The wind pushed through cracks in the walls, carrying voices that weren't whined at all. Whispers, layered and low. She heard her name once, then her mother's, then silence. Downstairs, Ballantine carried the locket back into the parlor. He cleaned it, polished it, and hung it on the wall where the family portrait used to be. He stared at it for hours. Around midnight, the sound began, soft at first, like dripping water. It came from the ceiling above him. He looked up. A stain had begun to spread across the plaster. Brown, then red, then nearly black. It grew in slow circles, pulsing faintly, as though something beneath was breathing against the boards. He rose to his feet, light-headed, and took the lantern. The stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed. Each step groaned like it didn't want him there. The hallway smelled of rot. When he reached Clara's door, the nails were gone again. The wood was splintered where something had forced its way through. The sound behind it wasn't movement. It was whispering, steady and rhythmic, like someone reciting a prayer. He opened the door. The bed was unmade, the sheets soaked dark again. The air shimmered with heat though the night was cold. The window curtains rippled inward, and the room pulsed with faint light. The same strange glow that once rolled over the fields during storms. In the corner stood the mirror, fogged from within. As he stepped closer, a shape formed, not behind him, but within the glass, pale, thin, draped in white. Her hair hung wet against her shoulders, and her mouth was half open as though caught mid-breath. Clara, the reflection tilted its head. Then, slowly, its hand rose and pressed against the other side of the mirror. The glass rippled under its palm like water. He reached toward it, trembling. His fingers brushed the surface, and it gave. For one impossible second, he felt warmth on the other side. Then the surface snapped back, and he fell backward, gasping. The mirror cleared. The reflection was gone. But across the glass, written in the fog, were words traced by an unseen hand. "BME to teach BBD." Ballantine stared. The candlelight trembled as he crouched, lifted the edge of the sheet, and peered into the dark. The floorboards had warped, leaving a narrow gap, just wide enough for fingers. He pried one loose with his knife. The smell hit him first, wet, heavy, and sweet, like flowers left in water until they rot. Then he saw the fabric. White lace. A piece of dress. He pulled harder. The board gave with a shriek, and a hand slid out from beneath it, small, pale, and cold as the swamp water itself. He stumbled back, dropping the lantern. It didn't shatter. It went out. The darkness swallowed the room. And in that silence, a voice whispered near his ear, soft and calm, almost loving. "You shouldn't have looked." By morning, the storm had passed. The servants found the master's room empty, the floor torn open. Mud covered the boards, streaked with prints, some human, some not. Only one thing was left behind: the silver locket, hanging from the door handle, still open. Inside, Clara's portrait had changed. Her face was no longer still. Her eyes were half closed, her lips parted in what looked like a smile. From the swamp that afternoon came the faint sound of humming. "If you've stayed this long, tell me, would you have opened the door?" By September, the plantation had grown quiet in a way that didn't feel like peace. The air hung damp and thick, the color of old paper. The sky above the cypress trees never seemed fully blue again. Only grey, dim, and swollen with clouds that refused to break. The Ballantine house stood alone now. The servants had left one by one, crossing the fields before dawn, leaving behind their tools, their clothes, even their shoes. Only Dinah stayed, out of guilt more than duty. She said someone had to make sure the dead didn't finish what they started. She hadn't seen Charles Ballantine in 4 days. His room was cold, his bed untouched. The study smelled of damp tobacco and swamp water. The front doors, once kept locked, were wide open, as though the house itself had stopped guarding against whatever wandered outside. And the swamp was louder than ever. It began humming again at dusk. Not like insects, not like frogs, but like something breathing through water. The sound rose and fell in rhythm, and when the wind carried it just right, it sounded almost like Clara's lullaby. Dinah would hear it while sweeping, or while praying. Sometimes she caught herself humming along before realizing it wasn't coming from her own lips. She'd seen movement there, too, small at first, ripples on the edge of the reeds, shadows in the shallows that didn't belong to birds. Then, one morning, something surfaced, a hand, just for a moment. Pale and swollen, fingers curling toward the light before slipping back beneath the water. Dinah dropped her bucket and ran. That same day, a stranger arrived. A preacher from Jackson who'd heard rumors about the Ballantine place. He came on horseback, Bible in hand, looking too clean for this land. His name was Reverend Collier, a young man with skin like chalk and eyes that never stayed still. When he saw the house, he paused at the gate. "God's breath doesn't reach this far," he said quietly. Dinah met him on the steps. "If you've got faith, you won't need courage," she told him. "If you don't, you best leave while it's still light." But he didn't leave. He followed her inside, his boots echoing on the warped floorboards. The air smelled of damp wood and something faintly copper. He opened his Bible, fingers trembling. "Well cleans it," he said. "All of it." But when he turned toward the grand staircase, he froze. At the top of the stairs hung the silver locket, turning slowly in the draught, catching the light as it spun. Beneath it, faint marks traced down the wall. 5 long scratches that ended halfway down, as though a hand had reached, then been pulled back. Reverend Collier swallowed. "You said she was gone." Dinah shook her head. "No one's gone till they're named." They began the prayer service at dusk. The preacher stood in the parlor, Bible open, voice trembling through each verse. Dinah lit candles in every corner, their flames flickering low and slow, never steady. The air grew heavy, thick enough that breathing felt like swallowing water. Then came the smell, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. It dripped once from the ceiling. Then again, landing in a slow rhythm that matched the preacher's words. When he looked up, the stain spread outward, a dark bloom across the plaster. "Keep reading." Dinah whispered, but he couldn't. His voice failed as the sound of footsteps began upstairs, soft, dragging, deliberate. The steps paused outside the master's room. Then they moved down the hall. Then they started down the stairs. The preacher dropped his Bible. Dinah didn't move. She'd heard those steps before. Years ago, Clara's steps had always been light, delicate, like someone who never trusted the floor to hold her weight. These were heavier. Wetter. They stopped just before the bottom step. A voice, faint and cracked, floated through the air. "Father." Dinah shut her eyes. "Don't answer," she whispered. "Whatever that is, it ain't her." But Reverend Collier was young, foolish, and curious. He spoke. "In the name of—" He didn't finish. The candles went out in one breath. The parlor fell into absolute dark. Something moved then, fast and soft, like silk dragged across the floor. The preacher gasped once, then fell silent. When Dinah found her courage to relight a match, he was gone. Only his Bible remained, pages damp, as though it had been dipped in the swamp. That night, the wind carried whispers across the fields. Voices calling names, not just Clara's, but others too. Names of the slaves who had died there. Names that had been erased from ledgers and stones. The swamp replied with a single, drawn-out note, a moan that trembled through the trees. Dinah stood on the veranda and watched as the fog rolled up from the water. Within it, faint lights began to glow, one by one, moving slowly across the land, like lanterns carried by unseen hands. They gathered near the orchard, forming a line that stretched toward the house. And at the very front stood a woman in white. Her gown clung wet against her body. Her hair hung like seaweed. Her face, pale, swollen, serene, turned toward Dinah with eyes that no longer blinked. "Clara." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then the lights behind her flickered once and went dark. Dinah ran back inside, barred the door, and prayed till morning. When dawn came, the fog was gone, and so was the preacher's horse. The well had caved in overnight. The ground around it was split open, the dirt fresh and damp. In the mud were footprints, large and small, human and otherwise, all leading toward the swamp. Dinah packed a small satchel that morning. She knew what the land was asking for. But before she left, she looked once more at the grand staircase. The locket was gone. If you've stayed this long, tell me, would you have followed her into the swamp? By the time the next moon rose over the Ballantine plantation, nothing living called that land home. The crops had withered into brittle husks. The fields looked scorched even without fire. Windows hung open like empty eyes, and the front doors swayed with every sigh of the wind. But not everything had left. Some nights, travelers passing on the distant road swore they saw a lantern light drifting near the swamp. A single, lonely glow, moving in slow circles, as if searching for something that couldn't be found. Others said they heard a woman's voice humming, soft and unbroken, beneath the hiss of the crickets, and somewhere beneath all that, faint but constant, the swamp breathed. That's how I first came to know it. It was the autumn of 1860 when I arrived in Mississippi, a surveyor for a railway company, hired to chart a path that might someday cut through what used to be plantation land. I didn't believe in hauntings. I didn't believe in anything that couldn't be measured, drawn, or explained, until I spent one night too close to the Ballantine swamp. The locals warned me. The blacksmith in town spat when I asked about the place. "Don't go near that water," he said. "It takes more than it gives." The innkeeper's wife made the sign of the cross. "If you see a light moving where no man should walk, don't follow it. It ain't fire. It's invitation." I laughed. Told them I'd camped near the swamp just one night. They didn't laugh back. When I reached the old property, the land felt strange before I even saw the house. The road turned to mud, then to roots and weeds. The trees leaned inward, their branches tangled like hands trying to pull me back. And then, through the fog, I saw it. What was left of the Ballantine home. The walls had collapsed in places. Ivy climbed through the windows, swallowing the banisters and fireplace. The roof sagged like a tired lung, but there was still shape there, still memory, and still sound. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I heard it. Not music, not wind, a faint humming from deep inside the house. I froze. The humming stopped. Then came a whisper, soft as a breath against my ear. "Do you hear it too?" I spun around. No one there. Only my lantern swinging in the mist. I told myself it was the wind, the echo of the swamp, the sound of distance and rot. But that night, while I set my tent near the edge of the old orchard, I saw something that would haunt me long after. A pale figure walked along the waterline, slow, deliberate, her gown rippling in the mist. She carried no light, but the air around her shimmered faintly, as though the moon followed her alone. When she reached the spot where the ground dipped into the swamp, she stopped and turned. Even across the distance, I could see her face. It wasn't whole. One side looked almost human, delicate, calm, even beautiful. The other seemed sunken, like something that had been in the water too long. Her eyes, one black, one blind, fixed on me for what felt like forever. Then she raised her hand and pointed toward the house. And I swear to you, I heard the creak of the front door opening. Though there was no wind, sleep came in broken pieces. Every time I drifted off, I saw the same image, muddy footprints crossing my tent, moving around me in a slow circle. The sound of water dripping, the faint scent of lilies and decay. Sometime near dawn, I woke to find my lantern extinguished and my boots soaked. I thought I'd been sleepwalking. But when I looked outside, the fog had thickened, and the trail I'd marked the day before had vanished completely. In its place, the faint shape of a woman's handprint pressed into the mud. It led toward the swamp. Against reason, I followed. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even the frogs had stopped. The only sound left was my own breathing, and beneath that, a heartbeat. Slow, heavy, not mine. Then I saw the water begin to move. It wasn't wind. It was something rising. At first I thought it was driftwood. Then the light shifted, and I saw skin, pale, almost luminous. A body, half submerged, hair floating like black moss. Clara. Her eyes opened. "Help me," she whispered, though her lips didn't move. "He won't let me sleep." I stumbled backward, mud sucking at my feet. The water rippled as though something massive stirred beneath her. Then I saw him, a shape behind her, darker than the water itself. Broad shoulders, a face I could barely make out, but the eyes. Oh, the eyes, burned faint and human. Samuel. He reached for her wrist. Her body twisted away, her mouth open in a silent scream. The water surged upward, and in a blink, they were gone, both pulled under, leaving only a few ripples that died in seconds. I ran until I saw the first hint of daylight. When I reached town that morning, I must have looked mad. Covered in mud, shaking, eyes wild. The innkeeper's wife didn't ask what happened. She only handed me a cup of hot water and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She nodded anyway. "You can't help her. None of us can. But you'd best pray she doesn't remember your face." I left Mississippi before the week ended. Never went back. But sometimes, when the night grows thick and the air feels wet enough to breathe, I still hear it. That faint humming through the dark. And I wonder if the swamp remembers me too. If you've stayed this long, maybe you heard it too. Maybe she's already found you. For a long time after I left Mississippi, I tried to forget the sound of that humming. But you don't forget something like that. It follows you, quietly, patiently. Even in the noise of the cities, the clatter of trains, the laughter in saloons. Sometimes I'd catch it, faint, distant, somewhere just beyond hearing, like a voice buried under a river. And when I heard it, I'd see her again. That face, half beautiful, half decayed, staring at me from the water's edge. Years passed. I built a life, or something that looked like one. But in the summer of 1865, after the war had burned through everything, I found myself back in Mississippi. The company sent me again, this time to map the new rail routes that cut across the wrecked plantations. I told myself I wouldn't go near the Ballantine place. I meant it, too. But you know how it is when something unfinished calls your name. The locals said the land had been sold to a banker from Memphis who never showed his face. Said the swamp had swallowed half the property now, took the orchard, the barns, even part of the main road. And at night, they said, lights still moved through the fog. Not fireflies, not lanterns, something older. I told myself I was only curious, that I needed to see it once more, for closure. But deep down, I think I wanted proof. Proof that what I saw that night wasn't madness. Proof that Clara Ballantine had been real. The house was worse than before. Only 2 walls still stood. The rest collapsed into the earth like rotted bones. A few iron nails clung to what had once been a porch. The air smelled of wet wood and old smoke. But something else had changed. In the middle of what used to be the parlor, there was a single, white cross planted in the soil. It was made from broken floorboards, bound together with a strip of cloth. The cloth was soaked dark, stiff with age. At the base of the cross, someone had laid flowers, not fresh, but recent enough to hold color. Magnolias. I remember whispering, "Who still comes here?" And then I heard her voice again. Not from the swamp this time, but from inside what was left of the house. Low, hollow, like something carried on the wind. "You came back." The sound didn't echo, it breathed. I turned slowly. There she was, Clara. She stood where the grand staircase had once been, her gown no longer dripping, but stained with black earth. Her skin looked fragile, almost translucent, veins blooming beneath the surface like blue vines. Her eyes were calm, too calm. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. Every instinct told me to run, but her stillness held me. She stepped closer, bare feet sinking into the mud where the floor had collapsed. The ground didn't seem to touch her. "He won't rest," she whispered. "None of them will, Samuel," I managed to say. At his name, something behind her stirred. A shadow, deep and shifting, rising where the staircase met the dark. Clara's face twisted with sorrow. "He tried to love me. He tried to save me. But my father..." She stopped, her throat convulsed. "He bound us both, to the house, to the soil." She looked at the cross. "He thought he could bury what he made." Her voice cracked, barely human. But the earth remembers everything. The shadow behind her moved. Slowly. Then all at once. It surged forward. Not a man, not quite a shape, but something that carried the memory of one. The air around it stank of iron and rot. Clara turned to face it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't hold him back anymore." The shadow roared. A sound that seemed to tear the world in half. The house shuddered. The mud rippled. And for the first time, I saw his face clearly. It wasn't Samuel anymore. Not really. His eyes burned like wet coals, his mouth wide and broken. His body tangled in roots and chains. The swamp had taken him, rebuilt him, kept him. He lunged toward her. Not to hurt her, but to drag her back. She didn't fight. She only looked at me once, her expression almost gentle. "Tell them we're still here." And then they were gone. Swallowed by the floor, by the mud, by the breathing land beneath. I stumbled out of the ruin, gasping, my lantern shaking in my hand. Behind me, the air filled with the sound of humming again. That same tune from years before, now deeper, more mournful, fading into the distance. By morning, the cross was gone. Only a single magnolia petal remained, floating on the surface of the swamp. I left Mississippi that day, for good. But the story didn't leave me. Over the years, I began hearing from others. Travelers, farmers, soldiers passing through. Each spoke of strange lights near the Ballantine land, of voices calling from the fog, of a woman in white walking beside the water. One said he'd seen her holding a lantern pointing toward the horizon, as if showing the way home to those who'd never made it. And sometimes, when the wind shifts at night, I still hear that hum. Not close, but not far either. Like something waiting. If you've stayed this long, tell me. If she called your name from the water, would you answer? After that final visit to the Ballantine ruins, I never set foot on southern soil again. But the story followed me like a scent. The kind you can't wash off. I took to moving often. New Orleans for a time, then St. Louis, then Chicago. Every new boarding house felt safer than the last. Every morning, I woke grateful to see the sun. But at night, the air would thicken, and the walls would seem to pulse. That was when I'd hear her humming again. Soft, rhythmic, never hurried. It never grew louder. It didn't need to. It just waited. I started writing everything I remembered. The house, the swamp, the faces, the smell of magnolia and mud. My hands would shake as I wrote, but if I stopped, the humming grew closer. So I didn't stop. Years went by. The world changed. The war ended. The railroads cut through the South, like veins of iron. Men talked about progress, about civilization rising from the ashes. But I knew better. I'd seen what the land could keep. Then, one grey morning, a letter arrived. It was written in careful script, the kind that trembles at the edges. The sender was a Mrs. D. Thorne, from Jefferson County, a name I didn't recognize. The letter began simply, "Sir, forgive this intrusion. I believe I've come into possession of something that belongs to you." A journal, bound in brown leather, found in the walls of what remains of the Ballantine estate. She described finding it while clearing what little was left of the old foundation. She said the book was wrapped in waxed cloth and tied with a silver locket. I hadn't left a journal there. Not that I remembered. But when she mentioned the locket, my hands began to tremble. "If you'd wish to reclaim it, please come before the month's end. I've been hearing the strangest noises near my home, as if someone is walking in water when there's no rain at all." That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was already on a train south. By the time I reached Jefferson County, the world felt smaller, quieter. The towns were hollow, the churches leaning, the river swollen from recent storms. Mrs. Thorne lived in a small white house near the edge of a cotton field. She met me at the gate. A tired woman with grey in her hair, and a voice that sounded like it had been whispering secrets too long. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I would," I told her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and roses. She led me to a table where the journal sat. Dark leather, water, stained, tied with a silver locket I recognized instantly. "Clara's." I didn't touch it. "Not yet." "When did you find it?" I asked. 3 nights ago," she said, "in what's left of their parlor wall. My husband and I bought the land for lumber. But the ground, it's strange there. Soft, breathing almost." Her voice broke. "And there's more. You'll hear it soon enough." As if on cue, a faint sound began. Distant, low, pulsing through the floorboards. Drip, 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 like water. Slow and steady, leaking through unseen cracks. Mrs. Thorne closed her eyes. "It starts every night at the same time." The sound grew louder. Drip, and then something new. A hum. I felt it in my teeth before I heard it in my ears. That same melody I'd heard in the swamp years ago. Slow, sad, beautiful. Clara's song. The silver locket began to tremble where it lay on the table. The chain curled in slow loops, as if breathing. Mrs. Thorne backed away. I told myself it was just the wind, she whispered. But last night, I saw her in the yard. Her eyes filled with tears. She was standing by the well, holding a lantern, watching the house. The humming grew louder now, filling the walls, vibrating through the air like a pulse. The lights flickered. Somewhere outside, a door creaked open on its own. And then, silence. The kind that feels thick, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I reached for the journal. The moment my fingers brushed the cover, the room went cold. The lamp flame stretched thin and blue, and a voice, familiar but distant, spoke from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You came back." A Mrs. Thorne gasped and stepped backward. "Ooh." Before she could finish, the journal snapped open on its own. The pages fluttered rapidly, stopping midway through. Ink blurred upward, forming letters that weren't there before. "He won't sleep until it's written true." The floorboards groaned. From beneath the house came the sound of water rushing, though the nearest river was half a mile away. Then, faintly, another voice, deeper, rougher, joined hers. "Samuel's. Tell them what he did. Tell them what the land remembers." The lamps went out. When the flame returned, Mrs. Thorne was gone. Only her chair remained, rocking gently as if someone had just stood. The journal lay open, the ink still wet. And beneath it, a single muddy handprint. I took the journal that night. I should have left it there, burned it, buried it. But I didn't. Because when I looked down at the page, the ink shifted again, and new words appeared, written in the same neat script, not finished yet. Now, as I sit here writing, I can hear that sound again. The hum, the water, the faint echo of Clara's voice. And outside my window, though I live far from Mississippi now, the ground is wet. It hasn't rained in weeks. If you stayed this long, tell me, would you have opened the journal too? I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I must have. When I woke, the journal lay open beside me. The candle burned down to nothing, and the room stank of swamp water. The window was cracked. The curtains swayed with a wind that didn't belong to this city. I was hundreds of miles from Mississippi, but somehow I knew the swamp had found me again. The ink on the open page was still wet. The words glistened faintly in the weak dawn light. The truth must be told before it drowns. I stared at the line until the letters began to blur, the smell of magnolia thickening in the air. Somewhere below, I could hear my neighbors moving about, footsteps, doors closing, the sound of normal life. It felt unreal, distant, like a play I'd already left. The truth, that's what it wanted. I began to write. But as I wrote, the words weren't mine. My hand moved without thought, and the ink formed letters faster than I could see them. I could feel something guiding me, not cruelly, but with urgency, as if the story itself wanted out. When I finally stopped, the sun was gone again. The last words on the page read, "He took her into the cellar." She never screamed, only sang. I froze. I hadn't written that. The ink rippled once more and a new line blurred through, faint but clear. "Go back to where she sleeps." 3 nights later, I was on the road again. The train hissed through dark countryside, carrying me south. I kept telling myself I wouldn't go all the way, that I'd stop short of the Ballantine property, burn the journal, and be done. But the words in that book seemed to hum through my hands whenever I tried. When I finally stepped off the train, the air hit me like a wet cloth, thick, warm, and heavy with rot. The swamp hadn't changed. It never would. The trees leaned the same way, their roots gnarled and black. The water shimmered faintly under a half moon, and there, in the distance, I could see the ruins of the house, smaller now, mostly devoured by earth and ivy. I carried a lantern and the journal. The closer I came, the louder the humming grew, low at first, then swelling, wrapping around the wind. It wasn't Clara's voice anymore. It was deeper, almost like a choir. 100 voices buried beneath the mud, all singing the same tune. When I reached what was left of the porch, I saw the silver locket glinting in the dirt. I bent to pick it up, but the soil moved under my hand. It wasn't solid. It pulsed. I stepped back as the ground began to heave, soft and wet, as though something was pushing upward. My lantern flickered. The humming grew louder, breaking into a tremor of voices. And then, a hand. It clawed through the soil, pale and slick, fingers trembling. Another hand followed. Then a face. Clara's. But she wasn't whole. Her body was tangled in vines, her skin cracked like porcelain. Her mouth opened, releasing only a rush of air and the smell of stagnant water. Behind her, more shapes began to rise, bodies half-formed, eyes hollow. Men and women, field workers, servants. All of them caught in the same endless crawl from the mud. The air vibrated with their song, wordless, mournful, ancient. And at the very center of them stood something taller, heavier. Samuel, or what was left of him. His body was fused with roots and rusted iron. The chains that had once bound him now ran through his limbs like veins. His eyes burned like dull embers. When he spoke, the sound wasn't human. It came from the earth itself. He made us. You carry him. I don't understand, I said, though I did. The journal pulsed in my hand. Samuel stepped closer, mud dripping from his arms. The blood that built this place runs through every stone, every root, every name. You came because you were meant to. You're the last to remember. Behind him, Clara's broken face turned toward me. Write it, she whispered. End it. The ground began to shake. The air turned to mist. One by one, the figures sank back into the mud, their forms dissolving into water and shadow. Only Clara remained, her eyes locked on mine. He buried me alive, she said, beneath the floor. I sang so Samuel wouldn't hear me die. But he did. He always did. Her body trembled. The locket in my pocket burned hot against my skin. Now write it true. And with that, she was gone. I found the cellar hours later, after tearing through what was left of the parlor. Beneath the boards, I found it. A hollow cavity, deep and black. The air that rose from it was colder than death. I lit my lantern and climbed down. The walls were slick with mud. In one corner, half buried beneath the earth, was a skeleton, wrists bound in rusted chains, and around the neck, a second silver locket, identical to the first. When I touched it, the song returned, soft, slow, almost tender. The journal in my hand opened on its own, its pages fluttering in the dark. Ink began to spill across the parchment, like veins spreading through skin. The story finished itself. He locked her below. He told the world she'd gone mad. He said the swamp took her, when it was he who did. He feared her shame, her hunger, her defiance. So he made her disappear, and the land kept the secret. When I looked up again, the cellar was empty. The bones, the chains, gone. Only damp earth remained, smooth as water. And then, from somewhere above, a voice, light, free and almost smiling. Thank you. I burned the journal that night by the water's edge, watched it curl and blacken, the ink bubbling into smoke. But as the flames died, I saw something move in the reflection. A woman's silhouette walking through the swamp, slow and unhurried. For the first time, she didn't look back. The humming faded. The air stilled. And for the first time in years, the Ballantine land was quiet. That was 3 months ago. I told myself the story was finished. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the weight of the locket against my chest. Though I buried both of them that night. And last week, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single line written in that same neat, trembling hand, not finished yet. If you've stayed this long, tell me. If she asked you to write her story, would you dare to pick up the pen? By the time dawn reached the swamp, everything had gone still again. The water no longer whispered, the trees no longer leaned. It was as if the land itself had finally taken a breath and decided to rest. I sat by the ashes of the burned journal, watching the thin line of smoke drift upward until it vanished. There was no sound except the soft hiss of insects waking and the slow ripple of water against the bank. It didn't feel haunted anymore, just tired. I thought about the faces I'd seen in the dark, about Clara's last words, about Samuel standing in the mist like a monument built from every wrong ever buried. They weren't monsters. They were echoes that refused to die until someone listened. So I did. And maybe that's all any story ever wants, to be heard before it disappears. As the light grew warmer, the fog began to lift. The ruins looked smaller, almost harmless in the daylight. I could finally see how the vines had wrapped themselves around the broken columns, how the moss had softened every sharp edge. Time was healing what people never could. I left the locket buried there. Some things deserve quiet more than memory. On the way back, I passed the field where the house once stood tall. The earth was flat now, still damp, still breathing. For a moment, I thought I heard her humming again. Low, steady, fading into the wind. But when I turned, there was only sunlight spilling through the trees. Maybe that's how she wanted it. Not a scream, not a curse, just release. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to comment below where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Tell me what story you want next. The swamp is quiet for now.